In November 1918, the guns of the Great War fell silent. Germany, exhausted by 4 years of total war, blockade, and revolution, signed the armistice. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated. On the 9th of November, a new republic was proclaimed from a balcony in Berlin. 2 days later, Social Democrat Philipp Scheidemann gave it the name by which history would know it, the Weimar Republic. The name came not from its capital. Berlin remained the capital. Ober remained the capital. But because the National Assembly fled to the quiet town of Weimar in 1919 to escape the Spartacist revolts and street battles raging in Berlin, the Republic was born wounded. It inherited catastrophe. 2 million dead, 4 million wounded. The Treaty of Versailles with its crushing war guilt clause, the loss of 13% of its territory, all colonies gone, the Rhineland demilitarized, and reparations eventually fixed at 132 billion gold, marks a sum no one believed could ever be paid. Revolution and counter-revolution tore the country apart. Freikorps units drowned communist uprisings in blood. The old imperial bureaucracy, judiciary, and officer corps stayed in place, quietly monarchist and contemptuous of the new democracy. Yet for a brief moment, there was hope. The Weimar Constitution of 1919 was among the most progressive the world had ever seen. Universal suffrage, including women from the age of 20, proportional representation, and sweeping social rights written into law. The first fatal fracture appeared almost at once: money. Germany had paid for the war not with taxes, but with debt, war bonds sold to its own citizens. Defeat rendered those bonds worthless. The government needed revenue and took the path of least resistance. It printed money. Between 1914 and 1919, the money supply had already quadrupled. That was merely the prelude. The true catastrophe unfolded between 1921 and 1923. In 1921, the Allies delivered the final reparations bill and demanded immediate payments. Germany could not make. Default followed quickly. On the 11th of January 1923, French and Belgian troops marched into the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland, to seize coal and steel as payment in kind. The German government called for passive resistance, strikes, and sabotage, and proudly paid the wages of hundreds of thousands of striking workers with freshly printed banknotes. The Reichsbank printing presses never stopped. In January 1923, one American dollar cost 18,000 marks. By June, 100,000 marks. By August, 1 million marks. By November, 4.2 trillion marks. A loaf of bread that cost 250 marks in January 1923 cost 200 billion marks 11 months later. Hyperinflation did not simply make money worthless. It devoured the social order. The entire German middle class, the teachers, doctors, civil servants, and small business owners who had spent a lifetime saving, was wiped out in months. Life insurance policies, pensions, and war bonds became waste paper. A professor who had saved 50,000 marks for his old age could not buy a cup of coffee with the stack. Workers were paid twice a day, sometimes hourly, and sprinted to the shops to spend wages before the next price surge. People carried laundry baskets and wheelbarrows full of banknotes. Farmers hoarded food rather than sell it for worthless paper. Barter returned to the countryside. In cities, banknotes were burned for warmth. They were cheaper than firewood. The psychological destruction was deeper than the material. Trust in contracts, in savings, in the future collapsed overnight. A generation that had been taught that diligence, education, and restraint guaranteed security learned that none of it mattered. Speculators and black market profiteers grew rich. Honest families starved. The educated bourgeoisie, the Bildungsbürgertum, that had been the pride of German culture, was proletarianized in a season. A bitter, poisonous resentment took root. By the autumn of 1923, the Reichsbank was printing 100 trillion mark notes. Paper and ink ran short. Children built toy castles with bricks of billion-mark notes. In some towns, walls were papered with layers of worthless currency. It was cheaper than buying wallpaper. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the nightmare ended. On the 15th of November, 1923, a new currency appeared, the Rentenmark. It was backed not by gold, Germany had none, but by a fictional mortgage on all the land and industry of the nation, one written mark equaled 1 trillion old marks. The trick was almost entirely psychological. People simply decided to believe in it. 5 days later, Finance Minister Hans Luther and Reichsbank President Hjalmar Schacht slammed the brakes, printing stopped, budgets were slashed, confidence returned. Prices stabilized within hours. The wheelbarrows vanished from the streets. The economic crisis was over. The human and political damage was permanent. Millions of middle-class families never recovered their lost wealth. Faith in liberal democracy, already fragile, was shattered. Extremists of left and right exploded in popularity. In a Munich beer hall that same November, an unknown agitator named Adolf Hitler tried and failed to seize power, but the soil had been perfectly prepared for him. The Weimar Republic would enjoy 5 golden years of relative calm and cultural brilliance between 1924 and 1929 jazz, Bauhaus, foreign loans, cabaret. But the scar of 1923 never healed. When the Great Depression struck in 1929, the memory of total ruin convinced millions that moderation and compromise were unaffordable luxuries. The hyperinflation of 1923 was not merely an economic episode. It was a moral and psychological earthquake that taught an entire nation that when money dies, everything built on trust dies with it.